Still spinning. Sometimes it takes a minute.
It's recording for me.
Me as well.
All right, we'll get started then. Okay, so hello, welcome. We're here for another hallway track. Super exciting. It's always nice to have the Angular team in. I started the hallway track because I got the opportunity to get to know some of the people on the Angular team during conferences, and they're just so cool and so chill, and they're just really normal people, and they're very friendly. And I wanted you guys to basically have that same opportunity. It's hard to get to know them as people when they're giving a talk. And so we like to bring the cool people from the Angular team to hang out with us without preparing a talk or anything. Like, we're not doing slides. We're just hanging out and talking, socializing. We can talk about Angular. We can talk about whatever. And so this month we summoned Doug Parker, who is the tech lead for the Angular tooling team. We've had a couple of people from the tooling team on, and we love them, and we're very excited about all the work that they're doing. So, Doug, thank you so much for getting up early in the morning and meeting with us. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and just kind of chat with everybody, see where people are coming from, what they're struggling with, what we can do on the tooling team to help with these sorts of things. And I haven't been as plugged into the community as I'd like to be recently, and so I'm hoping this can kind of give an opportunity to more directly engage and understand a little bit more where people are at and what we can do to help. I'll do my best to live up to the coolness factor set by the rest of the Angular team. So we'll see how that works.
Well, you've definitely come to the right place. If you want to plug into the community, we have some of our favorite people here. We have Kai Roeder, Dylan and Tom. We have Sonder and Rob, and we have questions. So probably what we'll start out with, if it's okay with you, is we'll just go around and let people ask questions and see, because there might be some questions that you can answer just right off the top of your head and help them with their work. And then I would really love to talk about what you're doing, what you're working on, what's coming next, because I know there's some really exciting stuff always happening behind the scenes. So Kai, can I pick on you first? Because
Yeah, sure.
I know you have questions. And if anybody else has questions for Doug, raise your hand. We'll go through the questions. And then once we clear up the questions, then we'll talk about what's coming next. Super cool.
Yeah, so
That was really fast that Sander raised his hand like Jeopardy game kind of.
We always know Sonder has questions.
do you want to go first, Sander?
No. Go
Okay.
ahead.
So
yeah, now I'm feeling worried. All right.
Before I go into more in detail questions, a more general question about the CLI, Angular CLI. So is there kind of a roadmap for it, or any planned features you can talk about? Anything exciting we can expect in the next months or maybe next year or so?
Sure. So I believe there is a roadmap. I think it's like Angular.io/roadmap.
Yeah, for Angular. Yeah.
That's kind of for everything. That's not specifically tooling.
Okay.
It's not /roadmap. I feel like it probably should be, but
I'll find
guide.
it.
Roadmap.
That's weird. Okay. It doesn't feel like a guide to me, but okay. So yes, we have a bunch of stuff going on in the pipeline. I think coming up later this month, we have the 13.1 release, which will have kind of a bunch of various features that we're including. I don't have a complete list in front of me, but some of the things that I know are coming here soon. We have the big one I think that I really like is that we're trying to put in some more direct VS Code integration, so that when you run ng-new, it'll generate kind of a config file for you for VS Code's editor configs. So get like run configurations and things like that. So you can just sort of click the play button and then it sets up a debugger, and that'll just work out of the box. You don't really need to worry about that. So
Is that going to be only on ng-add, or will there be a separate schematic to wire that up in an existing repo?
Currently, we're just doing it on ng-new. Since it is just one config file, it's easy to just kind of ng-new and then just copy paste the file, and that just works because it's just the one thing. It's simple enough to do that. In the future, if it becomes more complicated than that, we may end up adding some kind of ng-add schematic to support existing projects. We didn't want to force an editor config into projects that might not be using VS Code, so it's a little bit of little bit of a balancing act there. So we may end up doing that in the future, but at least for now, it's just NG new apps. Beyond that, I know we're also kind of updating the ng lint command, because previously this used to just kind of not do anything, and we would have you sort of install a third-party, a third-party builder for lint, which is usually Angular ESLint. That's the only thing people practically use for that. So we're able to update this to work like the ng end-to-end command. So instead, when you run ng lint, it's like, hey, you don't have any builder installed, but we know that Angular ESLint has one. Why don't you try that? And it prints out the ng add command for you, and just works for you a lot easier. So hoping to make it a little bit easier to streamline adding linting to an existing project. I know we've also kind of improved some of the some error handling and kind of the way the errors are displayed, to try and make things a little bit cleaner, and adding more color to certain outputs to make things easier to read. And kind of I know one other thing I'm really excited about is that we're adding kind of an estimated transfer size to your build output. So currently, when you run ng build, it kind of lists out all the different files that you have, and those include file sizes for how big they are, which is really nice because we're compiling things, we're optimizing things. We want you to be aware of how big your application is. But it's also a bit misleading because in practice, everything's gzipped when you send it over the wire, and so those numbers we're reporting aren't very directly applicable. And so one of the features is to kind of add an estimated compressed size or an estimated transfer size, kind of showing, it happens to be, 100 kilobytes or something that might be the actual file, but when you're going to gzip this, it's going to be down to 10 kilobytes or something like that. And so we want to give a more accurate representation of how big your app actually is.
I think that's a bad idea because they will ship more code.
Well, we do have other tools for hopefully preventing that around things like bundle sizes or bundle budgets and things like that, which I think we do include by default, if I remember correctly. I'd have to double check. But so there are tools to hopefully reduce that, but I think it gives a little bit more visibility into exactly what the differences are and how much code you're actually shipping, and so I want to try to have that kind of transparency. So certainly there are probably some other things I'm forgetting right now, but those are at least the ones off the top of my head. Kind of trying to improve the CLI experience a little bit, making things a bit cleaner, kind of shore up some of those edges. So hopefully people are excited about some of those.
Yeah, especially the error message improvements, because if it's included, I sometimes, if I write schematics, I sometimes try to test them out and run into, I don't know, I have a typo in my schematic option, and I get a weird could not resolve anything, blah blah blah, and a really cryptic error message. I now know what it is, but back then I really was confused.
Yeah, so schematics are particularly rough in a few of those areas. Some of the immediate improvements I don't think cover schematics, but I can say that one of the longer term goals we have, probably more on the year timeframe, is to kind of come up with a more common runtime for schematics, and kind of revamping that ecosystem a little bit to try and make things a little bit more compatible, and hopefully improve some of the developer experience there and make it a bit easier to work with. So they'll have a lot of that'll probably touch a lot of different areas, make it a little bit easier to deploy and compose schematics and things like that. So we're hoping that we'll be able to have some improvements there, kind of in the medium term, just not necessarily included with the 13.1 release. So.
Thanks.
Good questions. Who's next, Rob? Did you have more questions, Kai?
Yeah, sure, but let's
we'll keep going around in a circle so we can make sure everybody gets their questions in. These are good questions, you guys.
I
Go
thought
ahead, Rob.
Was next. I thought the sample was next.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. What is the CLI and the tooling team going to do for ESM support, or better ESM support, I should say, because more and more things are moving to ESM, and we need to import those things. But things with TypeScript and modules are, let me just say, a little bit rough. So
a little bit rough is very generous of you. Yeah, so Angular v13 actually made some big improvements in this area. In the Angular package format, we've kind of updated to using ESM by default for a lot of Angular's infrastructure. And so it's we've actually done a lot in that regard, and hopefully this should be something that will mostly just work. There might be some edge cases. I'm not as familiar with, unfortunately, this side of things. I feel like Alex Rickabaugh, that I know has come here, he was a lot more familiar with this. He could probably give you the nitty-gritty details on it. But essentially what we've done is kind of updated the package format to use these ESM builds. Essentially using that to make this experience a little bit easier and to do things more the right way, and actually moving off of CommonJS, because CommonJS has a lot of its own challenges. I won't get into all of them, but there's some significant bundle size challenges that you get from using that. I believe on the bundling side, we are still using Webpack, which I think does kind of use CommonJS under there. So I don't think we ship ESM, but we're still pulling in the ESM sources, is my understanding, from dependencies. Again, Alex,
I think you also are shipping ESM modules. At least I'm loading them and they work. So.
I'd have to double check.
Oh no, the Angular applications that the CLI puts out are not shipping ESM, I think.
Okay.
Angular itself.
Maybe we're further ahead than I thought it was.
Yeah. Angular itself is fully shipped in ESM.
Yes, Angular itself definitely is.
Yeah.
And it's okay. You don't have to answer all of the questions. We can always summon Alex Rickabaugh. You know, Sander's going to ask the good questions. The most
one of those things that I was tangentially involved in, so I kind of have a high level understanding of what was going on there. But definitely, there's a lot of complexity that goes into making these things, to pulling the ecosystem to ESM without breaking everybody, and so there's a lot more complexity than I was necessarily understood at the time.
Definitely. I just spent like more than a week getting Scully to work with ESM fully. Yeah, it is.
How are you?
It is. I'm fried. It is.
I recently tried it with 11T and did not work well.
No, I now have like a renderer that compiles an Angular application and then loads it into Node and renders out the pages. So
and more gray hair than you had last week.
Yeah, probably. And it's all doing this with ESM modules, but oh boy. And then today I found out that TypeScript 4.5 will have like massive more support for ESM modules than the current TypeScript, because most of the problem that I ran into was TypeScript and not anything else.
See, this is why, you guys, I was trying to make Sander wait until the end, because he jumps into the deep end straight from the beginning. So you guys have to trust me when I say, let's go to everybody and then wait until the end. Sander's going to have time for us. Okay, Sander, we're going to come back to you.
Okay.
Rob, how you doing, Rob?
Hey, I'm doing well.
You have questions easier than Sander's questions, Rob.
Of course. No one can top Sander. Doug, I know that Angular 13 doesn't have any, you guys are doing away with the, what do you call it? Is it Karma or Protractor? You're doing away with the testing?
Protractor, yes.
Right. So, do we still have like, does it generate the spec files? I haven't tried Angular 13, but does it still generate the spec files whenever you create a component, or, you know?
So the way that Protractor currently works, and the way that we're kind of pushing people for in the future, the way that end-to-end testing works, I should say, is that we're trying to kind of be a little bit more hands-off from that on the Angular CLI itself, and essentially kind of compose community tools rather than trying to support a direct system ourselves. So when you generate an ng new app, it doesn't include any end-to-end testing. But if you run the ng ete command, it'll basically say, hey, I can't do that because we don't have end-to-end testing framework set up. But there are these 3 or 4 community-supported end-to-end testing systems that we know work well with Angular and could be a good fit for your application. So that's I know, for instance, includes like Cypress and Nightwatch and a couple others. I haven't kept up very well with the end-to-end testing ecosystem.
We love Cypress. I love Cypress. A couple of us love Cypress.
I've heard a lot of good things. I'm hoping to play around with it sometime soon. I haven't done too much with it. But essentially, we know that these things work well with Angular, and they have schematics built in, so you can just kind of ng add, the relevant package. We can sort of display what all those options are. I think at one point we were looking into trying to make it more of a selectable list. So you could just hit enter as, I want Cypress, do that, and then we just do it. I don't know if that's coming in 13.1, but probably sometime soon.
That would be cool.
Yeah, so essentially kind of really easily setting up some of those third-party systems. And those teams already have a lot of existing documentation for how to migrate existing protractor tests, how to develop your own stuff on top and test Angular. And so there's a lot of great content out there, and we're more pushing people to kind of to use these community tools that can provide a bit more support than the Angular team has been able to do for Protractor in the past, and we think that that's going to result in a better experience. And Protractor was a very useful tool for its time, but it's something that has kind of been outclassed by a lot of modern end-to-end testing systems. So we kind of like to push the community towards some of those more modern systems rather than continuing to use Protractor. So that's kind of what our approach has been for now, and that's kind of the direction we're going.
Yeah. So you took out Protractor to do end-to-end testing, but what about unit testing? That hasn't gone away, right?
Yeah, that's still there.
Right.
That's all done with Karma. That still works just out of the box.
There is a way to ignore or exclude when you create an ng new to exclude the testing, right? But is there a way to maybe in the future that you guys can incorporate a way to create those tests for already existing components so we can regenerate them?
You can do that with schematics.
You mean sort of generating an empty test file for existing components?
Right, but not empty, but already. So there is a component already that has some dependencies, dependency injection in them and everything like that. So we need, when you create the new test, for those dependencies to also be included in the test file, because it just generates an empty one, like a shell, which is not good to,
I think that's more a task for a VS Code extension or an editor extension as it is for a CLI, because it can analyze the code you're in. It can be done by schematics though.
There is a VS Code extension. I know there's a community extension that allows you to kind of run schematics directly from the editor. So I could definitely see something that's like implemented as the schematic, but then you could just sort of run it as part of the editor if that worked better with your workflow. So I guess what you're talking about is more about generating the empty file, but the empty test, but then also including like the test bed setup stuff and mocking out dependencies. I hadn't really thought about that one. I think in general we kind of generate it just alongside with at the same time that we generate your actual class, and so we don't really know the dependencies just yet. But definitely, if you already had an existing one, I could see some value there. I don't think we really considered that too much. I'd have to dig in a little bit more and see. I think what you're asking for there, I think, is viable. You could definitely do that with schematics.
If we get that feature, we have you to thank, Rob.
Yeah. Thanks, Doc. He's gonna make it.
I'll have to look. Maybe I can. Maybe that'll be one of the GitHub issues I file from this. We can.
Cool. Thank you.
That would be cool. See, Rob's gonna be famous, man. That was a good suggestion. I did like it. Hold on, where'd my hands go? Dylan, you're up next.
Yes. Hi, Doug. Yeah, I was wondering, currently if you have to, let's say, rename or move a component, it's kind of more or less a manual job. Are there any plans to incorporate that into the CLI? So you could do something like, like a CLI command and just rename and remove different components and assets in your application?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this has come up before. We've had some discussions within the team. I think actually it kind of goes to Sanders' point around the editor integration. Because I imagine a lot of people would probably want to do something like that in the editor, kind of rather than typing things out on the command line. And it's something that we would want to integrate the two with a little bit more closely. And one of the things we've talked about, we don't have any immediate plans to do this, but kind of one of the sort of higher level thoughts that we wanted to do is to integrate the CLI and the Angular language service a little bit more closely with each other, so that they have a bit more knowledge around each other. And so you could do things around like being able to rename components, being able to move things, and then being able to kind of query your build graph to understand where the ng module is for something, and then being able to, maybe you're adding a new component to some things, and then we can also insert it into the relevant ng module and update imports for you and do things like that. That's kind of some of the sort of longer term things we're hoping to look into at some point, and kind of having a little bit closer integration between the CLI and language service to make those kinds of things work, and having a bit more insight and knowledge about your application and what we can do to support that. I think that's kind of along the lines of what you're getting at there, of just sort of having those more powerful tools within the CLI and the editor to make these kinds of refactorings a little bit less painful.
Right. Yeah, that answered my question. Thanks very much.
Yeah, the problem for the CLI is it needs the language service has like a live AST of your application, and it has the knowledge that you need for those things, and the CLI doesn't have access to that right now, and I think that's the problem they want to solve. Also, it is like a little bit of a different hard problem because it is a live thing. It's only in memory. It's not on disk, and so the CLI has no access to the memory of your editor right now. That can all be fixed, but it is not something that you can easily do in a couple of PRs.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex task, and at least right now, I think the CLI it can definitely look into your code base, and it does things with like ng update. It's able to transform your code in certain ways, but a lot of that's done a little bit more at the AST level and just kind of parsing things rather than having a complete understanding of your project and how things link together. And so the language service has that understanding, and we can leverage that to we can map a component to the ng module that it's declared in and things like that. Which is a more complex task that's handled by the compiler. So we're hoping longer term to have a bit better integration there and be able to handle some of those kinds of use cases.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
Excellent question, Dylan.
Thanks.
Kai Roeder.
Yeah. There's one feature in the CLI, especially for schematics, that I miss the most, and I wonder if this is something that could be part of the overhaul, or what you called it, of schematics, is conditional schema files. Like based on your first input, I offer you another second input, or like maybe you can do something like, hey, choose a model from your database, like or no, actually use footer. I used footer as an example here. Do you want to create a footer? If you click no, nothing happens. If you click yes, it asks you in which color do you want to have the footer, and something like that. It's not that helpful, I think, for outside of a company context, but for schematics you write inside a company context, it can be quite helpful because your platform you're working on, and you can build really great schematics that can reduce the time you need to develop certain things and don't repeat yourself. So is this something like you have thought about?
Yeah, that is something that's come up. That is one of the things we were hoping to address as part of this. It has been a common complaint. You're certainly not the first person to bring this up. So it is something we definitely want to improve with this. We're still in kind of the early design phases and kind of understanding exactly where the pain points are and what we can tweak to improve that. So we're definitely looking into that and considering it as a big part here. Not 100% on the solution yet, but I could definitely see something around like, you can define in, maybe you define the in the schematics JSON or the schema JSON, what, some of the flags that you're looking for, but then if they're not set, we may give a bit more control over the actual prompt in some way that you can kind of just programmatically do in your own code. So that might be one example of a way that you'd be able to kind of control it yourself to some extent. So we'd have to see exactly how that would work and what the best way of doing it is, but we're definitely aware that there's a lot of pain around that. We'd like to have some approach to make that work. I know there was a GitHub issue that came up recently about this. I don't know if that was okay. Yes. I was gonna say we just talked about this within the team like a week or two ago. I was trying to think like
that's the guy.
Yeah, so we talked about that issue within the team, and it's we definitely agree that it's a challenge, and we'd like to come up with some solution for that. I think the biggest challenge is more about how to scale the public API surface of that. Schematics is already quite large and not terribly well documented at the moment. So we'd like to refine things a little bit, and trying to come up with the right way to support this, which doesn't blow up the public API size and makes things still maintainable in the future. So it's something we'll definitely be considering. Probably not in the immediate future, but definitely something that we want to see happen.
Thanks.
I think the same thing happened, Kai, with you and Igor, because you were talking to Igor last month, and you guys had just been talking on GitHub but hadn't met yet. So now you get to put a face with the name.
Yeah, it's really helpful to be able to do that. Because
maybe you can do some sort of like little. So whenever you run the CLI, you can you ask the question: do you want this? Do you want that? Do you want whatever? Maybe you could draw a little like a schema of little I don't know, ASCII code, little drawings of different application types, and maybe you could choose those. That would be cool.
Emojis. We need emojis.
Might be a bit of a challenge in JSON. I like where you're thinking though. That's kind of a simple, very lightweight solution to that sort of problem. I can definitely appreciate the elegance of that.
Yeah, thanks.
Lots of problems Rob's solving tonight. Tom, you got a question?
Yeah. Hi, Doug. I haven't needed any schematics recently, but I was just wondering, is there any command in the CLI that will show you all the available schematics that are there? And is there is there any kind of public registry of other kind of public schematics available for discovering?
I don't know offhand. I feel like that is something that NG Generate should have within there. I can't think of anything offhand though. I'd have to double check. Unfortunately, I don't know if anybody else in the call happens to be familiar with that.
It would be maybe nice to have it in the guide, because in the guide, like I know in the GDE guide, like you have to open up a PR to add your own. Because the problem is that if there was a collection of all of the schematics of it, especially if it was like you could just run a prompt and get it, that means that the CLI team would actually have to maintain that, which would kind of become a job in itself because there's so much going on. But if they had a place somewhere where people could open up their own PR and submit their own schematic to the list, then they could just approve the PR and it would be easier. But I don't know if you would want to put that into a prompt. But it would be nice to have it somewhere. I don't know that it is there.
I guess
that there is a place.
I guess my interpretation of that question, which maybe was not accurate, but I was thinking sort of listing the installed schematics, or is it listing kind of available schematics that you could install?
Well, yeah, I guess so. Initially, the ones that are available via the CLI itself, and then secondly, any public, if there was a registry schematics that have been published by third parties.
I seem to recall that Pete was working on something you can put in the package.json of a schematic, so you can list them from npm list with some options. I think there are some possibilities there, but this I'm recalling this from like 2 or 3 years ago, so probably I don't know if this went in or not.
Yeah,
Tom,
I think on the.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think on the like listing local schematics listing installed schematics feels like something that we should be able to do. I don't know offhand if we actually have something like that. Listing sort of the third-party schematics that you could install would probably be tricky to do in a centralized manner, just because we don't have a complete registry of what all of those are. And that's kind of a design benefit a little bit, in that we aren't coupled to all of these different things. Especially useful, if you have your own company, maybe you have your private packages that do some of this stuff that you can't really share with us directly. I do believe there are common npm tags, kind of as mentioned about listing that certain things have or include schematics. So we could probably bind it to a search like that. Maybe it just does an npm search under the hood for certain things along those lines. So definitely I could see some challenges around the discoverability there that we might be able to improve. But I think probably a global registry would probably be a bit heavy-handed, but definitely I could see some kind of searching capabilities for some of those common places that people pull it from.
We have a CLI and schematics topic in Angular Nation, so that's one thing we could start, is if anybody wants to post a CLI or schematic or a schematic in there, they can. But also, Tom, you might consider just posting somewhere in the activity feed, or you could post in that topic if you want, and tag Peter Bick and Darwin and tell him that Sonder mentioned him, and ask him if there's any update to what he was working on. Because if he was gathering up everything, oh, Sonder found it. Never mind.
Okay, great.
There you go. 1,200 packages.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most comprehensive search right now. Be going through that kind of tag. But definitely I can see some, there could be some value in exposing that more directly in the CLI.
Yeah, but it's also nice because with the thing with the schematic, the CLI allows you to make your own schematic. So there could be like, and I know personally, because I did when the CLI first came out, I started making schematics just to like play with it that are never going to be used anywhere. So there probably would be, if there was like a whole collection of them, there would probably be a lot of abandoned stuff and crazy stuff that somebody published and then left there and never took down. So there's pros and cons always. Kai.
Yet another question for a future feature, maybe. A couple of months ago, I kind of was frustrated about how you need to set up schematics, and that there are no schematics that create schematics. So I basically wrote such a library, a bunch of schematics with ng-add support and stuff like that. And this really just made 80% of the documentation on Angular.io, like you could throw it away, because a lot of those steps are basically things that are repeatable, and you can actually put them inside a schematic with ng-add and ng-generate. So is there any plan to improve this? I would love to just throw away my code, actually.
Well, I think that's I had seen that before. I definitely appreciate you making that schematic, and I think it's one of those things where it's like it's one of those things where we could make it, but then on the other hand, a great community member just went through the effort of making it, so why would we want to invalidate that work? And I'm being a little facetious there, but yeah, I definitely agree that the schematics developer experience just as a whole can definitely be improved, and that's certainly one of those areas to make it easier to create those schematics. I definitely agree with your documentation point that the how to get started with schematics is quite involved on Angular.io and could probably be heavily simplified. So I can definitely agree with that. I think from a documentation perspective, we still kind of have to explain everything because we want to make sure that people understand what all these things mean and how they work. Though that can also be explained a little bit easier if it's like, hey, just run this command, generate it, and then you can just look at these files and see the stuff that they're doing and kind of explain them rather than how we get there, which could make things a lot easier. So I definitely agree that there's a lot of work that we can do there, and I think being able to easily generate schematics to start with is going to be one of those key pieces to improving that developer experience.
Good questions, guys.
Thanks. I still
All
got
good
one
questions.
left, but maybe someone else has one.
I'm gonna. Well, does anybody? Because I want to give Doug a few minutes. Listen, you guys. I told him this was a super chill group, and you guys have been firing questions at him since he got here. So I just want to everybody take a deep breath. These have been such good questions, but I also want to leave a little bit of room because I want my question always when my friends come by from the Angular team is, what are you working on next? What do you like? Do you have any challenges? Anything you're excited about? I know we had Alex and Dylan here recently talking about strictly typed forms. We're very excited about that. But you also have you tell us what's coming up.
Sure. So kind of unfortunate aspect is that a lot of the stuff that I happen to be working on right now is kind of internal to Google and not really visible or useful externally, which is a bit unfortunate. But I think the biggest thing that I am working on right now that I think would be interesting to this group is something called extended template diagnostics, which is going to be a new feature in the compiler where we're able to give some more comprehensive diagnostics and warnings about Angular templates, kind of building up an infrastructure around that. So kind of the example checks that we're including initially, one of them is for detecting the banana in box syntax, because when you're doing a two-way binding, you're supposed to put the banana in the box. That's kind of the little metaphor that we have there. But it's very easy to get that backwards, and it doesn't actually throw an error the way it works by default. It thinks that you're trying to bind to an output, which happens to have a bracket in its name, which is really weird. So it's a very easy mistake to make. And so with extended template diagnostics, we're able to detect this and show a proper warning about it and be like, hey, actually, you probably didn't mean this. You probably meant something else, even though it's still technically valid and it does compile, but it's almost certainly not what you meant to do.
I love that. It circles back to our very first question because we love error messages. We love them. They just make us feel so like, oh, this is so easy. Like, I know exactly where to fix it. Okay.
Yeah, it's a bit of a love-hate relationship, I think. You appreciate them when they're there. Well, I shouldn't say that. You hate them when they're there, but then you suddenly learn to appreciate them when they're not.
It's when we get new error messages that we didn't used to have that it's like, oh, that helped. That was easier. Yeah, that's cool.
Maybe because since Angular went to one-way checking, I guess. Mm-hmm. So it's just top-down checking instead of dual binding like Angular 1 was. Mm-hmm. So that's probably why, that's it gets messed up whenever you have a dual binding there. The banana in the box conundrum.
Yeah, it's a bit challenging to figure out the best way there. So that's one of the checks that we're going to be adding is to try and catch those kinds of cases and surface as a clear error. The other one that we're shipping with it initially is to look for nullish coalescing operators that aren't useful. So nullish coalescing is the double question mark that kind of like defaults to another value if the first value is null or undefined. And what we can check there is make sure that the type of the input to that actually contains null or undefined. Because if you're taking just a string and then you're doing double question mark on it, you're never going to get the second value. That's just useless. So that's probably a mistake in your template, or maybe it's not working the way that you think, or your type isn't accurate. So we can give more accurate more accurate diagnostics there and help kind of improve and clean up those sorts of things. What I do really like about it is that it kind of shows that we have more. It kind of proves a bit of the technology around it to show that we're doing more with the type system and actually able to query those types and understand what's going on and be able to resolve things and say that, well, actually this doesn't contain a certain part of its type, and so things are wrong or misleading in their own way, and we can surface warnings there.
Look, I have a question about that. If you're going to do this, are you going to support like Angular elements or web components that you say, hey, I have these 5 web components that I can use, but I still want type checking for my templates? Because right now, if you want to use web components, you have one option, which is basically turning off typing of your templates altogether.
Mhm.
So it would be nice if there was like a middle ground for that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think this would be more about sort of compiler warnings for sort of errors that might be going around in your templates. I think we probably wouldn't reach into Angular elements quite there. I think there's definitely an opportunity for better integration around like around being able to type check these sorts of things. And I know, for instance, in let element, you can sort of define you know, the type around your custom element specifically, and it's something that we could you know, define it in that way. I feel is something that could reasonably be imported and type checked. It would definitely take some work in the compiler, but I think it is possible to do to some extent. Again, of course, Alex Berkowitz would be the expert there, so
Yeah.
definitely chat more with him there. But it's something that, at least in my mind, is something that's possible. Obviously, a certain complexity to get there, but it's probably something that we would handle more directly rather than going through the extended template diagnostic system.
Yeah, the thing is, web components are a thing and they are really useful. And if you want to use a couple of web components in your Angular application, the only thing you can basically do is turn off template checking, because otherwise you get, no, I'm not going to compile this because my special thing is not an Angular thing and it is not a web thing. And it just doesn't even compile. So if I would only be able to whitelist a couple of those, that would be very, very helpful.
Yeah. So basically, go ahead.
Well, it's sort of I definitely agree with you. I'd love to see better integration with the web components and leaning more into that. I know from the runtime perspective, things get a lot more complicated because web components are a more existing standard, which is kind of different from what Angular itself, how Angular itself works and how we sort of conceptualize what a component is. So I know, for instance, when it comes to like how to render the component, web components work very differently from Angular components. When it comes to like being able to project them and put them into an ng template, or being able to allow it to participate in dependency injection and things like that. You know, web components, the existing standard for web components doesn't quite fit neatly into the Angular model, so it takes a lot of. It's definitely a lot of work and complexity to make it work in the way that people expect. So it's definitely a big challenge, and I know I'd love to see better integration there, and hopefully it's something that we can improve upon in the future.
You know, if anything, if you ever get to the end of your to-do list, or if you think you might see it coming, you can come here and we're going to be going, oh, Doug, can we have this? Can you give us this feature? Can we have, oh, you know, it would be cool. And then you go back and be like, Alex, listen, I just got back. Kai wants this. Sandra wants this. Then Rob wants to know if we can do this. And you'll always have job security forever and ever.
I think getting to the end of the to-do list is something that I've never seen happen on any project ever.
I know, so, right?
I wouldn't be too worried about running out of things to work on.
Yeah. Well, we'll always have features in mind, always cool things that we could do with the CLI. Okay, do we have time for one more question, Doug?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
All right, go ahead, Rob.
All right, sorry, Doug. Two questions actually in one. One, can we add a feature maybe to select another bundler instead of Webpack only, maybe in the CLI? And the other feature is when you do ng new, can you also include a flag there to like include service, and so it could generate the service and dependency injection automatically into the component? That's it.
Sure. So on the first point about the bundler, we are. One of our plans for 2022 is to do a little bit more investigation into different bundlers in the ecosystem and try to see what we can do to improve there. I know we want to kind of explore a little bit on different bundling, as well as improve dev serving. So if we can get like ESM dev serving and things like that, and use modern bundlers that are able to take advantage of that and work a lot faster. So we're definitely planning to do a little bit more investigation on that and hopefully come up with something. Hopefully come up with at least an experiment that people can play around with to see some of the new bundling and see if we can improve build times and improve some of the output and make things a bit better there. So we definitely have plans to make progress there. On the other point, I apologize, I already kind of forgot the question a little bit. Was that for generating some files? Can you repeat the second question?
Yeah, generating a new component. I want to include services, and then the service will create the service file and also dependency injected into the component already automatically. So I don't have to do none of that stuff. Let's say that I'm creating a tab, component. I want to have a service for the tab. So do you want to include a service in this file, in this new component? You say yes, and then it will generate the service, and it will inject it into the component automatically.
I see. So it's more generating the component, but then you're also able to kind of reference the particular services that you want to pull in,
right,
and generating that by default.
Right.
I don't think we've looked into that specifically. I feel like that is definitely something that certainly, being able to, like we talked a little bit earlier about kind of connecting with the language service and integrating a little bit more closely there. I can definitely see that being something that could be more easily improved there. It's one of those things that, like, typing out the command would be kind of unwieldy to be able to reference the specific thing that you want. But being able to have the language service and where we can provide like autocomplete and then sort of being able to like go down a list of different things that are available and going through that, I think could make that experience significantly improved. And so I could definitely see something along those lines as as we explore stronger integration with the language service. And could definitely be able to improve that use case a little bit more.
Yeah, I think if we would have like easy composable schematics, that would make this kind of thing a lot easier.
Yeah, I could definitely see like, a schematic to create the component, and then another schematic to add a service, and then you can kind of keep calling that each time and make things more composable along those lines. Yeah, definitely. I can see that being used to accomplish something very similar to this.
Super cool. Well, so many things. This was so many good questions, you guys. Okay, it is the top of the hour. This is actually my favorite part. It's time when we have a little tradition where we all come off mute and thank our guest. It's time.
So,
Thank
you,
you.
Doug.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Tom.
This is
Much
super
appreciate
cool.
your time with all the questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate really appreciate being able to talk with you all, and all these questions are really helpful for me to understand what we can do to make tooling better, and seeing where these difficulties are, and kind of let's talk a little bit about some of the future plans, sort of how that might fit into some of the problems you're having today, and hopefully see how they can actually solve those problems. So definitely happy to be here, and really appreciate you having me.
We loved having you. Please tell your team that we said hello and that we love them and that we're very excited about all the work that you're doing. And if you ever run out of work, come back, because we have so many more requests for you. Thank you so much again for stopping by, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah,
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.